Good morning, everyone. While you finish put up the set, let me welcome all of you now to our first plenary speaker. That is Professor John Hildebrand, and he's going to speak on rethinking STEM higher education in the 21st century. And I believe the theme was set this morning when the representative of the Ministry of Education spoke on STEM being the focus here in Jamaica. John Hildebrand is Regents Professor of Neuroscience at the University of Arizona in Tucson. He earned his baccalaureate degree at Harvard University and his PhD in bioorganic chemistry at the Rockefeller University. His research interests include chemical sciences, chemical ecology, animal behavior, and insect vectors of disease and agricultural pests. Before moving to Arizona in 1985, he served for 16 years on the faculties of Harvard and Columbia Universities. He is a member of the United States National Academy of Sciences, and we thank them at this point in time for ensuring that he's here with us. He's a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the American Philosophical Society, the German National Academy of Sciences, Leopoldina, the Norwegian Academy of Science and Letters. He's also been attached, I believe, to something Chinese. Einstein Professor at the Chinese Academy of Sciences. I believe I don't know if he can speak Chinese, but nevertheless, he's also been the Foreign Secretary of the National Academy of Sciences and one of the 5 elected officers since 2014. I first met John at the Inter-American Network of Academy of Sciences, that is IANAS. That's a body that looks after academies in Latin America, including the United States, Canada, and the rest of the Latin American countries. And somewhere around you see little small letters in the Caribbean. So all represented, and that's why I'd asked him if he'd be willing to come. And he seemed to have persuaded the National Academy to be here with us this morning. Thank you very much for coming to enjoy the beautiful ambiance of Jamaica, and I can attest to it. It's quite good.
It's a great pleasure for me to be here. Winston and I chatted about the fact that I had never visited any place in the Caribbean except Puerto Rico, which I've done several times. And he said, well, we have to fix that. And I told him I'd love to do that sometime. And so he said, well, there's going to be a meeting of the Caribbean Academy of Sciences. How about that? Well, it's wonderful that that came to be. And I'm delighted that my academy supported my coming here to talk to you about something that's been on my mind a great deal and increasingly in recent years. At this stage of my career, I no longer have a lab, but I am thinking a lot about the future of our enterprise, and that's what I'm going to be talking about here. I want to acknowledge the fact that the keynote that we heard a few minutes ago was a beautiful warm-up act for my presentation. I think the issues that were raised in that presentation by Mr. Martin, these are points that I'm going to be stressing here. Let me get organized here. Now, I want to start by giving a few disclaimers. I'm going to be talking about STEM education, but I'm not a professional scholar of education. I'm a scientist, like many of you, but I care a great deal about what will happen to our students in the future as they face new challenges. And so I've been paying a lot of attention recently to how we teach and who our students are and what they are facing and will face in the future. And that'll be the theme of what I'm going to talk about here. Now, of necessity, my perspective is one from the United States. I am not an expert on education in the Caribbean, or for that matter, anywhere else in the world. So please forgive me for using examples from the United States, but I hope you'll find them interesting and perhaps valuable in thinking about the situation in your countries. I'll be interested in feedback, actually, if we have a chance. about how relevant what I have to say is to your world. Okay, so what lies ahead for our students? And when I say students, for this presentation, I'm speaking mostly about post-secondary higher education, what we call in the United States college, typically a baccalaureate 4-year study or even a 2-year more technical study. I'm not going to talk in any significant amount about graduate education. And at the end, I will touch on pre-higher education. So what lies ahead for our students? We should be thinking about that as we think about what we teach them and how we teach them. What lies ahead is the fourth industrial revolution. In fact, we're already entering the fourth industrial revolution. I'm sure you've all heard a great deal about this. This is going to depend heavily on what's now called data science, on cyber technology, and merging of sciences and technologies in ways that are new and refreshing and likely to seed great innovation and progress. Now, in the United States, the career profile for students is such that roughly 80% of the fastest growing careers are in STEM fields. 20% of all STEM jobs require an advanced 4-year degree, a baccalaureate degree or more, and 50% roughly of all STEM jobs are available to workers who don't have a 4-year degree, but some postgraduate education. Now, about 12% of those jobs that don't require a higher degree are in the technical fields of installation, maintenance, and repair of instrumentation and equipment. STEM jobs for graduates from vocational schools and 2-year colleges, which are greatly proliferated in the United States, have a wage advance over those students from comparable education in other fields. So there's an incentive to be interested in STEM. And we'll be examining briefly in a few minutes how well those incentives work. Are students motivated? Now, this slide, which may be hard to see in the light here, talks about the priorities that people in industry and business are looking for in the people they want to hire. In particular, I'll single out that they're looking for people who are good at teamwork. Now think about your education. I see not many people who are as old as I am, but maybe nobody in the audience. But certainly when I was a student, there was no encouragement whatsoever to work in teams. And in fact, it was quite the opposite. I remember in my physical chemistry course, the professor told us the first day that if we were caught collaborating with any other student on our homework, we'd fail the course. So the incentives in the last century were to be a solo individual worker, to be specialized in your field. Now employers, especially in industry, want people who are nimble, flexible, and good at working in teams. Education to prepare students for STEM careers involves a number of important areas, anticipating what will come in the future. How to educate yourself, how to continue the educational process. A strong sense of curiosity and motivation to discover and invent. Good team working ability. Some leadership skills. Discipline to do what's needed on the job. And so forth. Enthusiasm. Often people talk about the fact that some of us are too enthusiastic. I don't think you can be too enthusiastic. I think we want to be enthusiastic about what we do, and we want our students to inherit that enthusiasm. And you can't see this probably, but what this says is you'll need a variety of skills to prepare you for the jobs that don't even exist today. That's what students face. And they have to learn to think outside the bowl. You can't see this maybe, but a little fish is jumping out of the fishbowl. So what about jobs in academia? That was what people in business and industry are looking for. The picture in academia, at least in the United States, is complicated right now. So what about jobs in academia? We were talking about industry, business. The picture in the United States, at least, is complicated. The number of STEM full-time faculty over that 40-year period that I mentioned roughly doubled. The number of STEM doctorates employed in academia roughly tripled. Now that tells you that they aren't all faculty. The number of other full-time positions in STEM for STEM doctorates rose sixfold. So this means that there are many opportunities for people with higher degrees in STEM, only a fraction of which are in academia. And in fact, it should be noted that in the United States, the percentage of PhD level STEM jobs for full-time faculty is steadily declining as a percentage of the total pool. Now, who are our students today? At least in the United States, this is a complicated slide, but it's a very different profile than it was when I was a student. For example, many of our baccalaureate students are older. They're not the classic immediate post-secondary students. Some of them are older. They're people who are working. They're predominantly now female in the United States, which is wonderful. And many of them are part-time students because they're working to support families while they're studying. This is a remarkably different student demographic than what was prevailing 40 or 50 or 60 years ago. And it's not inappropriate. I would say it's, in many respects, a good thing. Now, what do students say that they want when they go to college? They want up-to-date technology. They want access to this teaching staff. They want a highly employable outcome from their education and so forth. But the question is, how have we been doing in meeting the needs of both the students and their future employers? There's a problem, first of all, of persistence. Oops, sorry. I'm sorry. Technology, I'm having a bad day. I can't say I have a bad hair day. It's a bad technology day. Okay, so a study that has been reported of about 17,000 post-secondary students, that is students in college nominally, found that only 2/5 of those who were enrolled in STEM disciplines went on to obtain a degree in that field. So they didn't persist. They start in STEM and they drop out, or they shift to other fields. This is unfortunate, and I'll develop that argument a bit more shortly, but we're losing students out of the pipeline, and we need to ask why. And the question is, are we part of the problem of why we lose students who have been motivated enough to start in STEM and then who drop out or switch? Now I ask you, does this look familiar? When I was a student, this was a typical arrangement. And I was usually the student sitting roughly where the camera is. I could hardly see the professor. I didn't know what he or she really looked like. I could hardly see what was then writing on the blackboard. It was really an impersonal and ineffective way to teach. Of course, we had to make it work. So there were strategies to get along and succeed with this kind of teaching. But I would argue that this is part of the problem, and students today won't tolerate it. So the question is, why doesn't it work? Well, what are lectures good for? You know, they're good for presenting current information and for building interest. For the teacher is a good teacher and is enthusiastic. But lectures are not good for many of the things we really need now, like engaging the students and developing their skills and stimulating higher order thinking and fostering active learning. Lectures don't do any of that. And we can go further and say that in the well-known learning pyramid, the least effective thing we can do to help learners is to lecture to them. Reading is slightly better, audiovisual is a bit better, and so forth. The best thing is to use what you've learned to teach others or to apply it. In other words, to be active in making use of what you've learned. And we can modulate that by various strategies that even strengthen it further. Well, what I'm here to talk about is that there's a new paradigm ahead. In fact, the new paradigm is really unfolding as I speak. And I'll give you an example in a moment. What we need is more STEM degrees at all levels, not just PhDs, but even 2-year technical degrees, 4-year college degrees, master's degrees, and so forth, speaking in terms of United States degrees. Because as I've said, the STEM occupations are projected to grow. There are projected to be at least 1 million more STEM professionals will be needed. But fewer than 40% of STEM freshmen, first-year students in college, graduate with a STEM degree because of that hemorrhaging from the pipeline that I talked about. And in the end, only a small fraction of bachelor's degrees are awarded in STEM fields. This is not a way to meet the challenge of the needs of the future for innovation, for progress, for meeting the challenges of the fourth industrial revolution. So what's the solution? My colleagues and I, and many others believe that what's needed is active learning to improve retention of information and critical thinking skills, and to engage students in a way that passive learning or attempts at learning in a lecture format fail to do. And we believe that this active learning strategy not only causes more to stick with the student, but also increases persistence, encourages interest, and fuels enthusiasm. We need to provide faculty with professional development in order to learn how to use active learning, active teaching practices, and take advantage of active learning strategies. Most of us don't know how to do this. And I'll be giving you a very specific case study shortly to show how this can be achieved. Well, in other words, what I've been building up to is that we no longer need much of this. What we need is more of this. Students working together actively as an important, key, principal component of the learning experience. Now, active learning has a great history. It just hasn't been applied very much until recent years. Certainly not much at all until the 21st century. It's based on the notion that what I hear, I'm going to forget. Lectures don't work very well. What I see, I may remember imperfectly, but what I do, I understand and remember. I just want to point out that about 50% of what we see and hear, we remember, we learn. This is based on educational scholarship. But about 90% of what we do, how we apply what we've learned, that sticks. So again, it's an argument based on evidence for active learning. Now, research on learning has taught us a lot that we want to start by building on what students already know. We want to engage them with content before listening to lectures. Lectures can be an ancillary part of a bigger, more active learning strategy. We want to apply knowledge rather than just remember it. We want to collaborate with peers and learn how to be a team player and use problem-solving skills in groups. We want to identify what's wrong with our own thinking, our own understanding, identify the flaws of what we think we know. We want to learn how to revise our understanding based on that understanding and on feedback. And we want to embrace rather than avoid challenges. All of that is a goal of modern active learning. Now, you may ask, well, how do we know that it really matters? How do we know that it works? Well, there are studies that are very persuasive. One of them by Carl Wyman, who is a Nobel laureate in physics who decided to make the rest of his career focused in this area. He's shown that active learning strategies significantly reduce failure rates of students in STEM courses, and that they do better on conceptual testing if they've been learning through active teaching strategies. These are just simple graphics to summarize much more rigorous quantitative data in his publication. He's a strong proponent of active learning, and in STEM, you might want to look him up on the web and learn more about what he's doing. Now, there are many techniques that can be used in a continuum from starting with the very most basic things that we can do. For example, just writing a one-page summary of what one has heard in a lecture. That's something active, and it's clear from evidence that that little gesture of active exercise helps learning. But then there are other things you can do. You can work in groups. There's a strategy for big lecture halls where you can make it more active by using the so-called think, pair, share. This is where two students talk to each other about what they think they've just learned. And once they come to an agreement on what they think they've learned, they then share that with the greater group. And then the greater group comes to a consensus about what really was learned. This can actually work pretty well. We've done it in our universities in lectures of up to 350 students. So instead of sitting there like empty vessels waiting for a professor to pour information into them, the students do actually do something in class time after brief bits of lecturing to exercise what they've learned and to try to modulate their understanding of it. Of course, it gets even better when students have a chance to do hands-on use of technology. A great example is even at the very earliest undergraduate stages to get students in the lab to do research. And that comes to the top of this line where we get to more complex versions of active learning, including experiential learning. That is, teaching others or practicing skills in the lab and that sort of thing. So there's a lot we can do. Now I want to focus now on a case in point. This is what's being done in my university just over the last 5 years. And I think you'll see that it's quite a dramatic example of what we can accomplish. This is called the University of Arizona Undergraduate STEM Education Project. And I want to say right up front that what makes this work from the very beginning is that it's what is called a coalition of the willing. In the beginning, only 2 or 3 professors out of more than 1,500 in my university really wanted to do something different from what they've always been doing. So those 2 or 3 started, and I'll tell you about one of them in a moment. And others watched what happened. And so immediately, after 1 semester of piloting this with just a couple of willing faculty, what did I do? Others wanted to join in. And now the impediment for us is how do we provide opportunities for all the faculty who want to do this? So it's a coalition of the willing. Nobody told any faculty member they had to do this. Those who want to keep lecturing to a large horde of students can do that. But this has gone viral at our university because it works. It involves improved teaching techniques based on the kinds of things that I've been talking about. Small group work in class time. Frequent low-stakes quizzes. We use this a lot. That is, students take a quiz almost every week just to see how much they've learned. It's not going to make a big difference in their final grade, but it's to give feedback to them and guidance to the teachers as to how it's going. Lots of active connections among concepts and immediate student feedback to faculty about how much they're learning, what problems they've encountered, and so forth. Students learn to do self-testing. They learn to connect the concepts that they've been hearing about in class and reading about in the assigned readings. They do a lot of teamwork in class, collaborating with their peers, engaging with each other, discussing things in small groups, and explaining what they have understood to each other. All of this is just what I've been talking about. This is what makes it stick. And most importantly, in some way, this greatly discourages students from cramming before exams. I mean, when I was a student, I hate to tell you how often I waited until the last week before a final exam and then killed myself cramming so that I could deal with the final exam. And of course, when you do that, you may do well on the exam, but it then all floods out of your brain within minutes after the exam. That's no way to learn. So this greatly discourages that time-honored practice. I'm not going to dwell on this. There's just various strategies that we use at the University of Arizona, the Think, Pair, Share, something called ranking tasks. This is something developed for physics, but if you're interested in strategies for using active learning, you can look up ranking tasks and so forth. I'm going to keep moving here because I know people are getting hungry. Now, what's really pivotal is assessment. Again, I'm not going to ask any of you who are teachers or professors to admit publicly, but I mean, I question how often any of us actually does serious assessment of whether what we do in our teaching actually works. I have to confess that in almost 50 years of teaching, I never did anything more to assess the effectiveness of what I did other than to look at the results of final exams. That is not real assessment. I think we need to move into a new frame of mind, which is serious assessment, professional level assessment, to find out what works and what doesn't. And so with our program at the University of Arizona, the faculty at the outset determine what the student learning outcomes will be for every academic program, every course. The faculty map the outcomes onto specific courses in the program and separate and aside from course grading, the traditional grading, the faculty assess what students are learning. And that's much more feasible in the active learning context that I'll be showing you. And they discuss findings with all the program faculty. So the faculty collaborate. Those teaching different courses or many sections of the same course, they actually interact with each other and collaborate and compare notes about outcomes through assessment efforts. And then keep fine-tuning the curriculum, the individual courses, the individual lectures, the whole curriculum to improve student learning. So there's a kind of a loop here that we can describe. I won't waste time describing that. But it's a never-ending process of assessing student progress and understanding and adjusting what we do to make it work better. Now, I want to show you a couple outcomes that we have just in the first 4 years, actually, of our undergraduate STEM education project. First of all, it's really interesting if you compare, this is in the traditional versus reformed introductory physics course. So a lot of students take physics. This is calculus-based physics. In the traditional course, if you look at what students are doing in a lecture, a physics lecture, almost 70% of the time they're sitting there listening. Now, I've already shown you that what you hear, you don't remember. You don't necessarily understand. They may be taking notes, but today's students are more likely to be looking at their cell phones. That's a huge problem, distraction in the classroom. What's the professor doing in the traditional course? Well, about almost 50% of the time, she or he is lecturing. So talking at the students who are looking at their cell phones or sleeping, it doesn't work. But now look what the picture looks like for the reformed active learning course. The same course content, the same final exam, everything the same except the way it's taught. In this case, the students now, only a third of the time they're listening. That's because lecturing at the students is greatly reduced. As you can see here, the professor spends only about 10% of the time in class talking at the students. That's one example. My favorite example is actually the first success we had, which was in introductory chemistry. We have a course called Chem 101. This is introductory chemistry that's taken by pre-meds, by pre-chemical sciences students, by just about everybody in STEM, engineers, hundreds, thousands of students take chemistry. So the traditional lecture-based course is now compared each year with a parallel course with the same syllabus, the same content, the same goals, and the same American Chemical Society final exam. But this one is called Chemical Thinking. I love that name. And that was invented by the first professor in our university who engaged in active teaching or active learning strategies. Students in chemical thinking, data show, I'm not going to show you all the data, but it's published, they outperform those in the traditional course. They do better performance in conceptual assessments. They get better grades in subsequent chemistry courses, such as organic chemistry. They have better attitudes and motivation toward chemistry when they're interviewed or when they're polled. They say, I like chemistry now, and they didn't say that before. Better scores on common standardized final exam than in the traditional course. And importantly, because of that hemorrhage problem, fewer students withdrew from STEM pathways than those who took the traditional course. This is a really persuasive case, I think, and it's been one that other faculty at our university watched and then said, I want to join that game. So now we have this kind of activity going on, parallel offerings in engineering courses, in biology courses, in astronomy courses, physics and chemistry, and it's growing. Now, to make it work, where we teach, the nature of the space matters enormously. And I'm going to show you the very first example that in 4.5 years ago was achieved. This is a learning space, what we call a CLS, a collaborative learning space, where a classroom that looked like this, that had 160 seats in it, and a whiteboard and a projection screen up here, that was converted into a room like this that had tables that seat 4 students, and it has whiteboards that can be deployed so the students can write on the whiteboards, and various other things can be done in jimmying the furniture. So we lost some seats because that room now has only 112 seats, but we gained enormously in the effectiveness of what went on in that room. So that was the first room. In 2000 academic year 14-15, we had 1 CLS room. We've added them every year since, so we now have 31. We've taken traditional lecture halls, ditched the layout, and made them collaborative learning spaces like what you just saw. And some of them have a lot of seats, and some of them have just a few. And this is a never-ending process. It's growing all the time. The issue now is that instructors prefer these collaborative learning spaces over all other kinds of spaces, but we have a limited supply of them. We still have far more traditional teaching spaces than we do collaborative learning spaces. So we've created a demand that's hard to meet because it costs money to reconfigure the rooms. But it's wonderful to have the demand. We started with 1 professor who wanted to do this, and now the demand is enormous because it works. This strategy works. Now, what about students? What do they think about this? Well, students say, when they're polled, they say that the active learning environment enhances their learning. It enhances their activities to be in those kinds of classrooms. They are able to get immediate help because while they're working in little groups, the instructors walk around the room and engage with students actively face to face. And they prefer these collaborative learning spaces dramatically over other kinds of teaching spaces. So not only the faculty, the coalition of the willing, but the students, they're all saying, this is the way to go. This is what I want. Now the question is, did they really make a difference for students? It sounds like it from what I just told you. Well, it turns out that a strategic technology assessment in 2017 ranked active learning classrooms as the top priority. The greatest impact on student learning is not expensive technology. I mean, these are just tables and chairs, but furniture that promotes collaboration and interaction among students, and low-tech tools such as whiteboards. This is not terribly expensive, and I will tell you that the person who's driving this whole process at our university actually has applied for and gotten grants from companies to reconfigure classrooms because we're not a wealthy university. Now, evidence shows that the upfront cost is more than paid back by increased student learning and retention, that is, combating the hemorrhaging from the pipeline. Here's an example of the first professor who's engaged in this, working with students. He roams around the room and he talks to students like this. Okay. Now, one could design a curriculum for active learning based on any number of themes. But I just give you two examples that I find really engaging. And one of them we're planning to try to develop in our university. They're both being used in various universities in America. The first is to build on the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the so-called Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. There are 17 of them. You're probably all familiar with them, and it's very available on the web to read about this. But there's something here for everybody. And it's not just STEM, it's everything. You could build a curriculum around one or a few or all of these sustainable development goals. And students would therefore not only learn actively in technical skills, but they'd also learn to think outside the box, to think about interactions with other areas. I particularly like the little coda at the end of our keynote address this morning. Not to forget, not to overlook, not to downgrade, not to neglect arts and humanities. In fact, many of us feel that STEM should become STEAM with an A because arts are so important. Think about Apple. Apple telephones, iPhones, computers, iPads, watches, these are great technological innovations, but what makes them so attractive, so addictive is based on art in a way. It's design. We can't be innovative in technology without having an aesthetic and somehow human-inspired design aspect to what we produce. Now, the other example is the Grand Challenges for Engineering. The National Academy of Engineering developed these Grand Challenges, and again, if you read them right, there's something there for everybody. There are many websites about this, so I'm not going to dwell on it. But the Grand Challenges for Engineering are a way of thinking about what the planet needs to be sustainable, but also for human life to be sustained and enjoyable. They actually use that word, or joyful. Wonderful that engineers want a world where people live enjoyable lives. And partnered with this is a very exciting thing, I think, called the Grand Challenges for Engineering Scholars Program, which is spreading now to many institutions. And this is really innovative because unlike almost any other curricular reform, this one doesn't tell you what your content should be. It doesn't tell you what the curriculum should be. It doesn't give you a syllabus you have to follow to be accredited or whatever. This just says we have 5 student competencies that we want to achieve. It's up to you and your institution to figure out how your curriculum should be configured to generate those 5 competencies. I mean, what a wonderful idea. I've never heard of anything like that before myself. All we have to do is think about how to get, in our context, in our institution, with our resources, with our faculty, with our students, to 5 competencies. The first is a research or creative competency. This is where mentored solutions or project experience in a Grand Challenges like topic. So students work on one of these topics with guidance, and they learn what research is about, what innovation is about. The second is multidisciplinary competency. That is to learn to understand multidisciplinarity through actual experience with it, bringing together different points of view, different skills, different technologies. The third is business and entrepreneurship. Now, those of us in pure science don't often think about this, but don't forget, we're quickly immersed in the 4th Industrial Revolution. The ivory tower is gone. We have to think about why we're doing what we're doing. And developing something useful to society is important. Multicultural understanding. And this is engineers now who have said, we really have, as one of the 5 competencies we want to achieve, is multicultural understanding. That is something you can adjust for the intended culture. So it could be different in the Caribbean than it is in Northern Europe. But nevertheless, every part of the world is multicultural, and we should be engaging with that notion. And finally, social consciousness. Again, I think it's striking that engineers have said that at least two of these competencies are not about STEM per se. They're about human interactions and human understanding. So social consciousness, I'm sorry, I don't know what I'm doing wrong here. And that is how to serve people in society. So even a pure basic scientist should be thinking about how what we do will be important for the future sustainability of the world and for the welfare of the people and the societies that they comprise. Okay, now a word about resources. The academy I come from, the National Academy of Sciences, is one of 3 academies all under the same umbrella in the United States, as you probably know. The National Academy of Sciences, the National Academy of Engineering, and the National Academy of Medicine. And together they have a very large working research branch called the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. This used to be called the National Research Council. It's a little confusing, the name changed a few years ago. Now, NASEM is where we use our convening power. We convene more than 6,000 experts and leaders every year for committees, workshops, roundtables, and so forth. And they are meant to provide informed advice on major challenges facing the nation and the world. And the goal is to help shape sound policies, inform public opinion, and advance sciences, engineering, and medicine. Now, that's what our academies were created to do in the United States. It was not created as an honorific society, it was created as a working academy to advise the nation. And that's still our principal purpose. The products from all of this convened expertise are published by the National Academy's Press. And I wanted to call attention to it, the website is shown there, because we publish over 200 peer-reviewed consensus reports, workshop proceedings, and so forth every year. A total of 8,500 of them exist, and all of them are available free as PDF downloads to anyone. So please take note of that NAP Press website. Why am I bringing that up here? Well, many of them have dealt with issues of STEM education. Just a few examples that I pulled out together. A series on how people learn. This is about the science of learning. K-12 science education. Sciences and engineering for kids, basically. The graduate STEM education. This is a more recent one. The new field of data science for undergraduates. Undergraduate research experiences for STEM students. We have a culture in our country, in particular, I would say in my university, that we take students the day they come to college, right out of high school, and get them in the lab doing research. We have a program called Total Engagement, where we want every one of our 35,000 undergraduates to engage actively in whatever subject they're studying. In the case of STEM, to get in the lab and do research, or get on a major computer and develop algorithms, or do something. We want every student to actively engage in their field of interest. This is a very recent report, which is, I can hardly see it, but I really want to see the title. It's basically bringing, yeah, what? Yeah, I'm going to, yeah. It's, oh, geez. I don't know. It's basically bringing arts together with sciences, what we've already mentioned. And finally, even the idea of engaging citizens who are not in STEM education to get them interested in and contributing to STEM progress. Finally, the very end of what I want to say is I was commissioned to talk about higher education, but I'm worried about what happens before higher education. There's some sobering data. If you look at high school students, they start out in STEM, and as with each advancing year until their final year of secondary school, they drop out of STEM. And sadly, something like 69% of high school graduates are not well prepared to take up college level science or math. So we're not doing a great job, at least in my country, in K-12 STEM education. And really sadly, if you look at K-12 interest in STEM by grade level, there's a steady decline. Now, this is terribly disappointing because the fact is that kids love what we call STEM. Every kid is a natural-born explorer / scientist. Kids can't get enough of it. They want to find out what's out there. They want to look under every rock. They want to taste everything that they encounter. They're excited. They love it, and they engage with each other, and we drive it out of them by the time they graduate. This is really sad, and I think we all have to do what we can to keep the flame burning. I have a lot of thoughts about that. It's harder to do in a country like mine where every local school district can decide what they want to do. There's no central control of education. I admire places that have central policies that somehow engage students in a similar way everywhere. And finally, very close to my heart is the whole issue of STEM general education. That is, for students, no matter what they're studying in college, maybe they're business students, maybe they're English literature, or maybe they're Spanish history, but for all students, I want them to have some STEM general education, what we call general education. That is, that every citizen needs to know what science is, what engineering is, how it's done, in a simple-minded way, and to appreciate the importance of those pursuits, just to be informed citizens and to behave accordingly. And now, a shameless promotion here. I co-edited a book published by the American Academy of Arts and Sciences that's about this topic. It's about science as a component of a liberal general education. And why I'm telling you about this is that there are chapters in here by people who have had very successful strategies for introducing science to gen ed students, people who are not going to be STEM professionals, but who need to understand something about science. Again, it's available as a free PDF download from the American Academy website. Okay, that's the end of what I prepared, and I apologize for the technical glitches, and I'll take responsibility for all of that. I hope there's been some kernels here that are useful and interesting to you, depending on the perspectives you bring. Certainly, I think we can all agree that we can do better in educating and motivating young people either to engage in STEM or to appreciate and understand a bit about it, and in the process to make society more successful. Thank you for your attention. Yeah, sure. Okay.
I'd like to thank John for his excellent address just now. We emphasize the difference between what we call the older students and the newer students in terms of how you sit. Well, how we're sitting now is the older. And I suppose by the time we come to our next other conference, we'll use the participation method. We've been going around the Caribbean region trying to encourage what we call hands-on learning, hands-on training in science and technology to make science more interesting. But somewhere along the line, we are faced with the whole question of background understanding of science. And John, how do you get around the whole question? They come into education thinking that science is not to be done, it's too hard. And what is in it for them? I think they need to know, because now they still are saying, what's in it for me? And to encourage them to do STEM, how do you get around the same problems of background knowledge?
How do you get around the whole question with the kind of science with the background knowledge, thinking that science is too hard, too difficult?
Yeah. I mean, this is a common complaint. The students say science is too hard, it's boring, it's too challenging. I'd rather look at Pinterest. That's our fault, because as I showed you quickly at the end, kids start out really motivated, and we steadily lose their interest, at least in my country, because we don't do a good job in the crucial K-12 years. Why is that? It's partly because we don't engage people properly for the teaching profession in my country, so that probably no area is more poorly represented in the teacher population than STEM. Typically, someone who's hired in a high school to be a soccer coach is assigned to teach physics, something like that. That happened to me when I was in high school. It's just absurd, and it's irresponsible. We take kids who are motivated and we turn them off instead of keeping them motivated, so they wouldn't notice that it's hard. They would say it's worth doing this because it's wonderful. And I take, as a representative of the educational establishment, I think it's our fault. We need to do better. And we may think, well, I teach graduate students, it's not my problem. No, it is. It's all of our problem because we understand how important it is to do something to keep the kids from leaving the field, to abandoning their initial interest and motivation, whether they're going to be STEM professionals or not. We want them to maintain their interest and enthusiasm for STEM, even if it's hard.
I'd like to ask a question then from the floor. Could you give your name, please? And
I'm Craig Peru. I research fellow at the Mona's School of Business and Management, and I'm very interested in your presentation because I've been looking at some of the similar issues here in Jamaica. We had 7,000 students out of about 71,000 students sit physics and chemistry in 2007, and the popularity of physics and chemistry has been steadily growing since then. So the challenge in Jamaica isn't that people are being turned off, because certainly there's more and more of the students, these are 17-year-olds, sitting the end of high school exams, CXC, O-levels. They're actually more and more turned on by it, but our best students leave shortly afterwards for the United States, Canada, and UK, and very rarely do they return. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah. First of all, you're obviously doing something right in Jamaica, and I got that impression from the keynote that in fact I think we should learn from you and emulate whatever you're doing that's keeping interest high and even motivating students. The brain drain from Jamaica is something I don't know how to solve. You know, the way things are going in the United States, I think we may start to have a brain drain. I won't elaborate on that, but I'm very depressed about the current state of affairs. And I see other countries that really value STEM, and I think we're going to start feeling the pain of brain drain. The only solution I can think of is more business, more STEM-based industry needs to develop here, and that's something maybe you understand better than I do. I don't know how to do that. But I know, for example, in Cuba, another island nation, there's a very robust pharmaceutical industry innovating and developing new drugs way out of proportion to the size of the population. So I know it's possible for a small island nation to do that. Everyone mentioned Singapore. Singapore is an amazing story. So I can't give you the answer, but I want to encourage you because you're obviously doing something really right in the front end of that.
I'll just take one more question because it's almost halfway through the lunch already.
Oh, I can't hear you.
So I want to say that I can see around, for example, that there are some teenagers about 15 years old. They have some mistrust about science coming from the fact that they don't really see what is now the objective of science. Seeing, for example, that we go to, for example, for very polishing chemistry, that was before. For example, the genetics that can be used for genetic humans. So I think that now the question of ethics in science is very important. And sometimes young people, they just do not understand where we are going with all this science. Okay, and then there is a kind of mistrust coming from kids. Okay, that's what I was saying. What do you think about that? And how to teach? I mean, we can have a positive message saying that we are going to do green chemistry and things like that, but it's not enough, I think.
It's a very important topic. I wish I had more time to put many things into my presentation that aren't there. Certainly, professional conduct and ethics in STEM is very important. In fact, one of the courses I teach now, and I'm happy to say I teach it with my wife, who's also a STEM professional, is called Biomedical Ethics and Healthcare. So we talk about, and these are first-year freshman undergraduate students that take this course. They love it. And it's because we do it in a completely active learning way. There's not a single lecture in the whole course. And the way we do it, you ask you how to teach ethics, is we have the students teach themselves. We have them debate. We have them do role playing. We have them engage with sticky questions like, well, you could think of the examples. I won't take up your time. But we put difficult challenges to them, and we have the students wrestle with it and then come to their own conclusion about what's right. And it's amazing how well they do. If you put it in their hands and have them wrestle with the ethical issues, at least in that context of biomedical healthcare, they do a wonderful job, and we're not lecturing to them. We're engaging them actively in deciding what's best to do.
Let's give him a round of applause then for his presentation. But we can't let him go back to the United States of America empty-handed. And therefore, we're going to a small presentation. Narangani Panakala, and the Department of Mathematics will give a small presentation on our behalf. Thank you very much, and please convey express our thanks to the Academy when we return to the United States of America. Thank you very much. I believe it's now lunchtime, I would imagine, so we're half an hour late, but we'll see how we can make it during the rest of the day. Thank you very much.